Hi, Kris.
Hi, Rudy.
How are you?
Doing well.
Yeah. So before we start, I'll let the sharing option be opened. So this way you can get on and load up your slides. And I don't know if you've used Zoom before.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Okay, so you should be good to go.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Hey, look, you look different.
You think? My hair is so long now.
Oh, okay.
I haven't had a haircut in 6 weeks. Problem.
That's it, man. You're being old, you know, your hair grows more slowly, but if at all.
Good. All right. Well, I'm ready. I'll just put myself on mute. I'm ready when you are to kick
Okay.
off.
Yeah, we've got about 10 more minutes or so. And so I'll just kind of introduce people in this new format and rules for engagement.
Okay.
And of course, talk a little bit about you before I hand it over to you.
Sounds good. Now, will it be, will they see just my slide deck or will they also see my video?
Well, off to the side, when your slide deck is on, all of us will appear in little strips on the side, or
Okay.
anybody can place it anywhere on their window. It's kind of cool. But
Yeah, I haven't done this with a slide deck before. So.
Yeah, your slides will take complete attention, but it's a little bit, just want to kind of alert you, once you open it, it may appear on your screen, but make sure you push the share button so that it comes on everybody's screen.
Okay. I'll make sure that I'll get a thumbs up from you.
So in fact, we have Dan from our IT department, LTS. He's waving his hand.
Yes.
He's the firefighter. In case some things go wrong, you know, he's going to rush in with the crew.
Good. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
No trouble. I have a few other colleagues who are going to jump in too, just to be sure everything is.
So we're the guinea pigs here. Thanks a lot. I got a huge response, and I'm really glad LTS have come out in big numbers.
Hey Rudy, it's Susan. I just wanted to check in to see how everything went. Did I see Daniel's on here? But did they get everything straightened out with LTS and the hosting capabilities?
Well, right now we're going to go the old-fashioned way where we allow Kris to kind of get on the screen, share it with us. So we're going to do it that way. She's not, quote, a co-host. It was just too, I didn't have time enough to kind of go through all the machinations. So we're just going to give it a go right now. Okay,
so when you start at 1, make sure that everybody else except for Kris is muted.
Yeah, in fact, I can do this at my end, or I can just request, as you say, Susan.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a laundry list of things I'll go through before we get the ball rolling.
Okay, and I'm gonna keep watching the list of people and kind of checking them off to make sure that the people that were supposed to be here.
You can, Rudy, you can make anyone a co-host on the fly as you like. If you are looking at the gallery view, you can see all the different people. You'll see a little ellipsis icon, a little 3 dots up in the upper right-hand corner. Mm-hmm. And if you click on that, you should see an option to make them a co-host.
Well, will that, Dan, will that apply to non-Lehigh EDU addresses?
I think it should work just fine as long as they haven't arrived at the meeting anonymously, as long as they've logged into their Zoom client first before they've gone to the meeting. It should work fine. But yeah, I mean, you can try it out just now. If it works.
In fact, right now I'm hovering on Kris's picture. It says make host.
Oh, make her a co-host.
Make co-host. Oh yeah, there we go.
And that'll allow her to both share her screen and have her video up at the same time.
Without invoking sharing screen for everybody.
Right. She can then, as the co-host, share her screen and also have the video on at the same time.
Okay, and she'll have control of muting and non-muting.
Exactly.
Okay, then my question is, right now I'm looking in the security feature. It says allow participants I unchecked rename themselves so that they couldn't rename themselves. But should we uncheck the share screen so that only the hosts or co-hosts can share screen?
If that, if you're confident that this is going to work and you don't need to worry about it, then yeah, go ahead and uncheck that. But
Because it'd be Kris, and if she's a co-host, then she should be good.
yep, you can test it out right now. If she likes, she can go hit that share screen button and
I unshared it.
switch to speaker view.
Okay, we got about 4 minutes to showtime, and I think we're in pretty good shape. So, Kris, you're able to kind of load and share screen if you had to. You're able to do that? Okay,
Yep.
all right,
All right.
perfect.
Oh, beautiful.
And Rudy, are you recording this? Do you have it set?
Yes,
For
it's
Yeah,
on
I see the
record.
recording's on.
Yes, it's a default option on my setup.
Good.
Oh, we're good to go.
All right.
All right,
And
I'll sit
Rudy,
here quietly. I'll mute myself.
the final number was about 48 people,
Okay.
and that's not counting the students. It's outside
right.
of the students.
Well, academics are always fashionably late, so we wait
I'm just saying.
a couple of minutes after showtime begins, right?
Well, plus Rudy, there's no cookies.
There's no cookies, I
No,
tell you
that's why
what.
people come.
And there's no dress code too.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have like about 4 minutes left.
So I'm going to do another little test. I want to see if I can mute all and but the co-hosts escape it. So Kris, can you unmute?
Yes, I can.
Oh, good. So, all right. So I have that control too, Dan. So
Excellent.
good. Okay, give it another couple of minutes. People are still rolling in.
Hello, Jim Robinson.
Hey, Jim, how are you?
Hi, Rudy Mohanad here.
And Jim Robinson here.
Okay, good. So we're going to have quite a big crowd today, and I was just waiting for a couple more minutes before we start the ball rolling.
And I'm going to go back on mute so I don't pick up my background noise.
Okay, good. And in fact, I'll advise everybody when we start.
I also have the ability to just hand pick people and mute them. So if I see somebody that doesn't mute after a while, I'll just automatically mute them.
Clinton Carter, or one other. Clinton Carter, or one other.
Hey, Clint. Okay, how are you? So, I'm just running a seminar, and Clint, can I call you maybe in a couple of hours? You're still in Dallas, is it? Okay, good. I just want to follow. I just want to follow up on our discussion last time we had. Okay, good. Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. We are about to start in our seminar series. We switched from real life to virtual, and we have quite a crowd here. In fact, so big that my whole screen is just dotted with a whole bunch of attendees. So this is a virtual event, virtual audience, and we have a virtual guest speaker. But she's not virtual to many of us because she's done this a few times in the past year or two, Kris Ohleth. So before we get into the topic, I just want to kind of give you an outline of what you'll expect for the next hour and a half or so. After I introduce Kris, we'll have Kris make her presentation. In the interest of running things smoothly, I thought we'll defer all the questions to the very end. If you have a burning question, please share it on the chat screen. If you go down to the very bottom, there's a nice feature. You can chat. You can chat with everybody, or you can chat with anybody you like. But if you pertinent to our seminar, if you have some questions that you would like to raise at the end and make sure that I address it, please put it in there. I got Susan helping me out too. So please look at the chat feature to kind of get your questions in line. The other thing is we will have entertained Q&A from students first, and then we'll take on the industry folks. And I think we have a lot of time to kind of make sure we can cater to both audiences. And finally, before Kris gets on the air, I'm going to be running a poll also at the end of the talk. And this is really for feedback for us on, what are we doing right and what are we doing wrong and how can we improve as we go forward. And more importantly, I think in this format, I'm sure we're going to stumble quite a bit. We want to know what we can do things right and what we should eliminate next time we get together. So let me first of all talk about Kris. So her topic is offshore wind in the United States, an update. And it is an update because she has presented twice before. The first time her company was bidding on projects here in the US, and since then they've been highly successful. And for those who haven't heard this before, I think it'll be quite a treat. So question you may ask is, why wind? Why wind energy? Well, wind energy, as you all know, is renewable. And over the years, it's become very mature technology. You have wind turbines as one of the largest proportion of renewable resources around the world. And the other good news is that it's become cheaper to operate. What we call the levelized cost of electricity of wind energy resources has dropped tenfold over the last decade or so. So it's very affordable, almost on par with many of the traditional resources. And then you may ask, why offshore wind? Well, offshore is where the wind, the energy that's converted to electricity, is quite even and quite steady. And believe it or not, a lot of people don't have any objections. It's not in my backyard or NIMBY. And we're very fortunate on the East Coast because we have very shallow waters up to the continental shelf. So you can very conveniently locate wind resources. That's not the case in the West Coast, but on the East Coast, they're very fortunate. So finally, Oersted, which is a company that Kris is with, has won a large project that has really gotten them very busy and gotten them a lot of limelight. Now, Kris is the strategic manager for stakeholder engagement with Oersted. She's a native of New Jersey, not far away from us, from Lehigh. That's probably why she's come here once or twice before. And she has extensive experience in this area. And so without further, she's got a master's from the University of Rhode Island, and she lives in Morris County, New Jersey. So Kris, you're on stage.
Okay, thank you. Rudy, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? All right, thumbs up. Well, thanks all for having me. And as Rudy mentioned, I've had the opportunity to visit with you in person a couple times before, and these are incredibly unprecedented times. I'm delighted, Rudy, that you've taken the initiative to try to keep some normalcy in our lives and keep us connected. I think it's so important. So thank you. Hats off to you for doing this, and really awesome for all of you for coming out and staying engaged. I know that in these times, you know, sometimes it can feel depressing or disconnected, and we'll need to use this technology to create new pathways to stay together. I will give you a small disclaimer that I am home with my 3 dogs, and at some point, I did run them a lot this morning, but at some point they may want to chime in with some interesting facts about offshore wind. If that happens, you know, Rudy will fill in with a fun fact while I let them, but we're hoping that does not happen. We're going to get started. I'm going to share my screen with you that will have approximately 20 slides or so. I'm going to go through. Now, Rudy asked me, you know, Kris, can you give us kind of a new dimension, a new angle, something that you could announce about, you know, since you were here, and I guess last time was in September of 19. And I guess really what's interesting now is we're pivoting from this really exciting moment where we've won these consecutive bids in the US to we're pivoting from that to our execution phase. And the execution of offshore wind farms is perhaps somewhat thankless, much less exciting, and a long slog. So today I'm going to give you an overview of what we're looking at in our portfolio. I'm going to go a little bit more into detail on the New Jersey project since I'm most familiar with that. And, you know, and we're going to talk a bit about what it means to actually execute on something on, you know, stakeholder, technical, and other promises you've been making to communities. How does that translate, and how do we take this nascent industry kind of into full swing? So that's where we're going to start, if that's okay, Rudy.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, Rudy, are you able to see my screen now?
Yes, we can see it. I can see
Okay.
it.
Put that into full mode for you. Great.
Okay, got it. Go ahead.
Awesome. And then, as always, Rudy will make these slides available in PDF form for you afterwards, so don't feel a need to necessarily have to write a lot down. Writing things down, the things I would encourage you to write down are your questions or your comments, so that we can, after this deck, have a bit of a dialogue. I think that's usually the most interesting opportunity for us. Just by way of background, as Rudy mentioned, we are the global leader in offshore wind, Oersted. We're a Danish-based company with our US headquarters in Boston. I work primarily from my home office always, so not much of a change for me now. We built the first wind farm in the world back in 1991. That project was called Vindeby, and the entire project was 5 megawatts. To give you some sense of perspective, one turbine is at least twice that size in the projects that we're building now. So we've come a long way in nearly 30 years. What this says to me, though, as I look at this from someone here in the US, is we are essentially 3 decades behind the opportunity that Europe has found. and we have a lot of catching up to do. So what you'll hear a lot about in our approach to the US market is about scale, about moving quickly. It's about bringing costs down here like we've done in Europe. We do have one small wind farm here in the US that's called the Block Island Wind Farm, and that's that second image down in the slide. It's only 5 turbines. Each one is 6 megawatts, so it's a 30 megawatt project. And it was designed to power the island of Block Island, who before then had to rely on a very dirty diesel generator, very expensive diesel generator to power the island. So for the first time, that island is energy independent with its own wind farm, and then any additional power is transmitted to the mainland of Rhode Island. It's a wonderful project to see if you get a chance over the summer. It's very nice. You can take the Block Island ferry out either from Montauk or Point Judith, Rhode Island, and take a look at that project. It's quite spectacular, even though small by comparison of what we'll be building. And then finally, we've built the world's largest wind farm, the Walney Extension Project, which was commissioned about 2 years ago now, 659 megawatts. So just to kind of give you a sense of where we are, and I know many of you folks are really up to speed on this, just a brief reminder. I also just want to put this out there because sometimes we have naysayers who'd say, offshore wind is not, it can't happen, it's not economical, it can't work at scale. And, I just want to assure people that, we have over 1,300 turbines built in the ocean. They're working very well. It is an engineering feat, but it's something that we have under well control now. And in fact, our first project, Vindeby, back in 1991, we decommissioned that project a couple of years ago. And it is now, there's one of the components is actually in our office in Copenhagen. So that's kind of cool. But so, these projects work, they work for us, and we're looking forward to bringing them to scale in the US. Before I talk about Ørsted's projects, I want to talk about the entire slate of potential for offshore wind off the US coast, the Atlantic coast here, which is over 25 gigawatts. If you can take a look at the map here, you'll see, and the projects in blue are the Oersted ones, but then there's also all the grayed out areas. All of those areas have been leased by other developers, our competitors, to build wind projects. And combined, we're looking at 25 gigawatts of offshore wind in the corridor from Boston to Washington, D.C. And that's a wonderful opportunity for us. I think, I take a moment to say that in case you're not familiar about the leasing paradigm, all of these projects are located in federal waters. So once you're more than 3 miles from the coast, on the East Coast anyhow, you're going from state waters to federal waters. All of the projects that you see here are located in federal waters and via the jurisdiction of the Department of Interior's Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. You can see in the graph what the current and proposed offshore wind targets are for each one of the corresponding states, and then which states have actually procured and how much they have procured in terms of their megawatts and the contracts they've let. So this is just an overview slide to give you some context for what we're going to talk about. Rudy mentioned a little bit about why offshore wind anyhow. Well, these, this geography that you see now lining up in these 3 panels is directly aligned to the previous slide, which shows where the offshore winds will happen. There's 3 main factors that a developer like us uses to think about where we want to put a wind farm. It's the combination of the coastal electricity demand, where you can find the wind, and then where the continental shelf is buildable. And you'll see all 3 of those awesome assets coming together off the coast of the East Coast of the US from Massachusetts down to Virginia. And so that's where the development focus has been. Now, you may have heard about offshore wind being developed or proposed for the West Coast. Now, the West Coast has 2 out of 3 of these opportunities, the first 2. The third, the continental shelf, is very deep there. And so it's very challenging using current technology of the monopile foundation to build a wind farm on the West Coast. On the East Coast, again, we have this great shelf for building with the current technology. Now, floating technologies are important and they will be the future of offshore wind, but right now there's no design that has been embraced by industry, and so therefore it's still in the later stages of the research and development mode. So we're looking forward to that opportunity and being able to site wind farms on the West Coast as well. We're just not there yet. Now, diving a little bit more deeply, this is the Oersted portfolio that we're developing here on the East Coast. We've been awarded 2,900 megawatts in awards, and that's all the way from Massachusetts down to Virginia. We have the capacity and the lease area to build up to about 6 gigawatts, so almost double that. We have double the capacity in areas where we've yet to be awarded. So the only project, again, in operation is the Block Island Wind Farm, and essentially that's a demonstration style project. And then we have these 6 other awards. And as I mentioned at the top of the talk, this is now our opportunity as a developer to kind of really put our money where our mouth is, pivot, and enter our execution phase. So that's what we're focusing on now is, you know, the 4 to 6 year perhaps execution phase of some projects, depending on you know, what the terms of the power purchase agreement are and such. So I'll talk a little bit more about ocean wind in a moment, which is right at the heart and the center of our portfolio. And being a Jersey girl, New Jersey is always at the center of the world for me, but truly it is when we look at ocean wind and we look at offshore wind, because this geography from Massachusetts to DC all needs a supply chain. And New Jersey has awesome ports for building up that supply chain and then providing, you know, the materials and the jobs really for the region and not just the state. So we have great opportunities in New Jersey, and we're excited about talking more about those port opportunities. Really, there are kind of 4 main components that are enabling us to move into execution phase. One of them is scale. We've essentially divided our portfolio into 2 different clusters, the Northeast cluster and the Mid-Atlantic cluster. So you can see up in the Northeast, that's where Revolution Wind, the Block Island Wind Farm and such are sited. And you can see that is essentially a lease area that is an amalgamation of areas. Now, we find huge synergies as a developer that allow us to, for example, mobilize a survey offshore within a cluster as opposed to just the project that I showed you earlier. So I'll just flip back quickly. Here are the projects. They're all located on a lease area that makes up that cluster. And so we can then, you know, kind of spread some of the cost across the projects. And those, you know, the rates for some of the survey vessels are, you know, they're hundreds of thousands of dollars per day. So the more we can synergize and kind of socialize those costs across projects, we can see results in cost savings for the business and overall for the industry. And at the end of the day, that's for the ratepayer. So these are important. The site proximity is what I was just speaking of, which is the next bullet. The geographic coverage from Massachusetts to Virginia represents that sweet spot for offshore wind development. And I think the last thing I wanted to mention that we haven't talked much about before, Rudy, which are our joint venture partners. Now at Oersted, we have a very strong expertise of building offshore wind farms. What we have less expertise on is what we call the dry side, connecting the cables from the wind farm to the land-based grid. And so it's important that we can use and access joint venture partners like PSEG in New Jersey and New York, or Eversource in New England, who have extensive experience building transmission systems, existing local partnerships, and tapping into them. And so part of our strategy for execution has been attracting these the partners and then working with them collaboratively on the wet versus dry side. And that's been our focus lately, merging 2 large companies and their cultures and schedules and contracts in and of itself is a huge feat. So a lot of our time and energy now is spent figuring out how these joint ventures will work going forward and how we can be most supportive of developing the projects with that structure. Another important component that we see in bringing down costs, as Rudy mentioned, is the rapid advancement of offshore turbine technology. On the slide now, you will see a depiction of the turbines we've used over time, the scale of the turbine, the opportunity to build less foundations, right? So if you think about, if you have a 100-megawatt wind farm and you have a turbine that's 5 megawatts, you would have to install 20 turbines. Basic math says that if you have a 10-megawatt turbine, you could install half of those to get to the same capacity. And so that is critical because offshore construction is so very expensive, and it can be risky and time-consuming and potentially hazardous. So putting safety and cost always first. We're always trying to minimize safety risk, and we're minimizing costs by building less turbines with each project to get to the same capacity factor. What's interesting is that our Vindeby project, as I mentioned earlier, was such a small machine. The entire project of the wind farm was 5 megawatts, and now all the way to the right, the Skipjack wind farm, which is also the same actually as our Ocean wind farm, will be a 12 megawatt project. I'm sorry, 12 megawatt turbine, which is the largest turbine that's ever been commissioned and built, and GE is currently building that for us. So it'll be the first commercial deployment of a 12 megawatt turbine. I wish I could have sent you some poll questions, Rudy. We could have asked the audience how big they thought turbines could ever get in the ocean. I know there's a lot of discussion within the company. People say, oh, we never thought there would be a 1 megawatt turbine, when that was like 20 years, 30 years ago. And now here we are with a 12 megawatt machine. People talk about 50 megawatt turbines now. So it's kind of amazing to think about the technology. So maybe next time, Rudy, we could do poll questions if we're still doing, if we're still needing to do this virtually.
Yeah, okay.
Great. So we're going to move on to the next slide. This, again, just kind of giving you the landscape view of the cumulative offshore wind installations over time. Right now, we're to nearly 18 gigawatts of offshore wind. And again, this is primarily in Europe. But, just to kind of give you a sense of where we've come since 1991, where you barely see a mark on the graph at this scale. And now, really getting up to those big numbers. This is our totals through 2018. Rudy mentioned earlier the importance of costs coming down. These numbers are in euros per megawatt hour, since that's the metric that we can best measure, since the offshore wind farms have been built in Europe. But you can see that just over, from 2012 to 2019, in just about 7 years, we've seen a drop in the levelized cost of electricity by over 60%. Now, we don't know exactly what the costs will be in the US yet. We all kind of proposed, anywhere from, some developers as low as 7 cents per kilowatt hour. And we'll see as we actually deploy and execute these projects what the costs end up being. There are a few important factors in the US that make the supply chain a little different for us. One important driver is the involvement of local unions and the labor force in the US. Labor and the union workforce are very expensive. And so in the US, we will see different numbers to start with. We also don't have that beautifully streamlined supply chain in place yet. So we don't have all the companies that offer all the services. So there's going to be, some learnings, I think. And so, what numbers will we see? Will we see this, 5 cent per megawatt hour, 5 cent kilowatt hour in the US to start? Probably not. But, maybe when I come back next year, Rudy, I can give an update on what we're seeing as projects start getting to be built. I wanted to give a little update on Ocean Wind. That's the project that I work most closely on, and also the largest project that's in the Oersted portfolio in the US. In fact, the largest offshore wind project in the US to date that's been awarded. It's an 1,100 megawatt wind farm located off the coast of southern New Jersey. The closest point of the project is about 15 miles from the coast. And if you take a look at the polygon that's located in the map off the coast of southern New Jersey, you'll see that essentially there's two outlines. The one, tan or gray outline there, that's the outline of our entire lease area. Now, the blue outline is the subset where we'll actually build the ocean wind project. So a couple important things to note there. First of all, you'll notice that we are using about half of the lease area. That gives us an awesome amount of additional capacity for building in the future, in future rounds of bids to the state of New Jersey. And then secondly, you'll notice that we're not building in the area that's closest to shore. And you may have learned in some of your classes or known typically that wanting to reduce cost is an important driver for building a wind farm. The shortest distance of cable that one could use to connect the wind farm to shore helps reduce cost. Why are we building the wind farm further from shore than we need to? That's important for our stakeholders. Rudy mentioned at the top of the talk that my role was in stakeholder engagement. And what we heard when we took the original design of the wind farm to the communities is, the further offshore you can put this wind farm, first of all, the further you would be from the migratory corridor for avian species. So off the coast of New Jersey, there's a very prominent migratory corridor for birds that go from Canada to Mexico each migration season. And it's quite impressive. New Jersey is known for it. In fact, that southern coast tip of Cape May is an important spot for bird migrations. And so when we heard from folks that the further offshore we would be, the less chance we had to interact with birds, we said no problem. We moved the wind farm further from shore. Well, we didn't say no problem. There was a lot of consternation and hand wringing and issues because that means it costs us more money. And for developers, our bottom line is critical. But at the same time, recognizing that if you don't actually understand what stakeholders are telling you, you may never build your project. And the project you never build is the most expensive one, right? So we heard that was an important thing. In addition, we heard from stakeholders, the further offshore, the better, because we don't want the visual impact from the beaches. And so again, moving that project to 15 miles from shore, where you can see in that blue outline, was less of a visual impact. Now, next time I come, Rudy, I hope it will be in person. We are developing virtual reality experience of the offshore wind farm. So I'll bring goggles, and you can put on those goggles and see what it's like to actually be on top of one of these turbines, at least virtually. And you can see what the wind farm will look like from shore. That's one of our new stakeholder engagement tools that we're developing. So we hope to be able to bring that to you, and you'll be able to take a look at the wind farm virtually next time we get the chance to meet up. I'll just mention a couple things on the schedule, but on that last bullet up top, we will power over 500,000 New Jersey homes with this project, which is a massive feat. There are about 8 million households in New Jersey. So it's a big chunk out of that demand. In terms of our schedule, we have our ongoing stakeholder engagement and our project engineering and design. In 2019, we submitted what's known as our construction and operation plan, the COP, and that went into the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM. Sorry for the acronyms. I've been trying to not do that. But our COP was submitted to BOEM in 2019, and that's important because that is the vehicle for our entire permitting process. That process takes about 2 years and is straight up the most important kind of timeline restriction we have right now. Until we obtain our permits, we are not able to move forward with the actual construction process. And so you'll see in the timeline that we anticipate receiving those permits by 2022, and we will then initiate the onshore construction piece. In 2023, we go offshore and we initiate that offshore construction. And by 2024, we'll be able to join the on and offshore pieces and commission the project and start generating electricity by the end of 2024. What's really interesting is, and if you check out our YouTube channel, Oersted's YouTube channel, we have a lot of really cool construction videos. We can erect a turbine in 1 day. So we will have 99 turbines associated with this project. So it'll take us about 3 to 4 months just to erect the turbines because we've kind of gotten it down to a science. But that's not the hard part. The hard part is working with stakeholders, getting the permits, doing the engineering and design in a collaborative way that advances the best project for our stakeholders and for the state. And so to that end, our project has offered some economic and community development opportunities. We have been part of the Atlantic City community now for 2 years nearly. In May, it'll be our 2-year anniversary of having our home office in the local community of Atlantic City. We have made significant local investments. In fact, we will invest $695 million to the local economy, to the New Jersey economy, as per our bid commitment. So that's a tremendous boon to the economy of New Jersey, and I would say especially and particularly in these times when so many economies are struggling, we are offering a new industry and a new economy. For the long term, we will have 69 jobs for over 25 years of the operation of the wind farm. So again, the construction jobs are for about 2 to 3 years, but then the operations are 25 years, and those are the long-term jobs. Really what's exciting too is the idea of bringing manufacturing, that supply chain that I talked about, bringing that supply chain to New Jersey. That's what's going to really help proliferate the explosion of jobs, and something that New Jersey is doing a great job of because they're offering us this pipeline of development that's 3.5 gigawatts by 2035. That will really get us to scale. We have signed a memorandum of understanding with Rutgers, Rowan, Montclair, and Stockton universities to perform local marine science related research and other functions, helping us engage local stakeholders. Having a local university be your voice and be a really powerful stakeholder opportunity we've noticed in the States. We've also dedicated $15 million to what we call the Pro New Jersey Grantor Trust, again, to help fuel that supply chain. This will grant money to local businesses to help retrain or retool their businesses to participate in our supply chain. We're participating in a workforce development program with Jingoli, who are a local construction company in Atlantic City. And we're already working with a variety of local New Jersey companies to help design, engineer, and permit the project. An exciting thing that we launched, Rudy, that we didn't know about the last time I was with you was our EcoPAM project. And this project EcoPAM stands for Ecosystem and Passive Acoustic Monitoring. So it's a highly sophisticated, technologically advanced program where we are going to deploy the yellow glider that you see in this picture, and they're about 20 feet long. Rutgers University is going to deploy that for us, and we will essentially take that glider and have it undulate throughout our lease area to help us hear the vocalizations of marine mammals to understand where they are. And that's important for us and for all of the offshore wind industry because marine mammals have very sensitive vocalization and auditory structures. And so we want to make sure that we are not disrupting their behavior, that we are not injuring any marine mammals. We are in this for a green and sustainable economy. And so we want to make sure we're doing right by the environment. And so we announced this multi-million-dollar research platform with Rutgers. We're also partnering with the University of Rhode Island and Woods Hole to create essentially an entire sensing network to help understand what's going on, what's the habitat and behavior of these North Atlantic right whales. They're just so sensitive. In fact, researchers estimate there are 300 individuals left in the population, just about 300. So it's a very sensitive species, and we want to be very careful with it. So this EcoPAM project, we launched the announcement early in this year, and we'll actually be launching the buoys. Hopefully, we were supposed to launch in April, but now because of COVID, we've had some issues with vessels. But we're really excited, and we'll start to see some really interesting data come out of this on the biologics. As I mentioned, for me especially, stakeholders are critical to what we do. And I think what I want to explain something about is what's behind the Oersted business model and why this is so important to us. At the top of the slide, you see 4 boxes: develop, build, operate, and own. And that, for us, for me anyhow, is what sets us apart from so many of the competitors, because we develop all of our own projects, we build them, we operate them, and we own them for the entire life cycle. In fact, we decommission the projects at the end of 25 years. And so what that means is that it's important for us to be engaged with our local stakeholders. We are going to be in these communities for decades, and that is why stakeholders in turn become one of the most important components of building these offshore wind farms. To that end, we've been in close contact with the local community. I mentioned the issue with viewshed. Oftentimes, people who have expensive beach homes do not like to see turbines in the ocean. And so we are moving these turbines essentially out of view, not completely, but essentially out of view, except for on the clearest of days for those local communities. Working closely with the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, very interested in ecological impacts, in siting wind farms properly so that they're not impacting the environment. The fishing community are some of our most important stakeholders because they are out there for generations using the ocean, right? For generations, literally hundreds of years. And we want to make sure that we're building a wind farm that they can use for fishing that will not disrupt their previous patterns of fishing. And then certainly the academic world, that's one of the reasons I'm here today with you, is we find it very important from a recruitment perspective, from engaging the best and brightest minds as we hire hundreds of people to staff up this industry. And also to learn what researchers are doing in the academic space, because oftentimes you're leading the way. And so we are constantly engaging with the academic community. From the research and development perspective, we have a strong R&D program internally, and we're working with the national labs, with research organizations and private entities to advance technologies that, again, help us lower costs. Just want to touch briefly on the fishing engagement and how we work that. Essentially, and what you're seeing in the picture here is one of the turbines from the Block Island wind farm. And you can see there's actually a fishing tournament going on right around one of the turbines, because what happens is the turbines actually create an artificial reef style foundation where all the fish can come and aggregate and get into the nooks and crannies and start the basis of a food chain, which attracts other fish, which attract other fish. And that attracts people, because people like to fish. And so this is an exciting opportunity, but what we do in the community is we engage fisheries liaisons, and those are people who work for Oersted and who are delivering the message. When we have a survey, for example, in the ocean, we are communicating with our marine stakeholders. The next level down is our fishery representatives, who are actually local fishermen, who are our ears, who are hearing and seeing things on the docks and communicating that back to us. We are committed to doing that outreach, which is early and often. And once we hear from those liaison and representatives, they give us that input so that we can adjust the layout and design of the wind farm that is most respectful of the existing space. And then that's what essentially we call collaborative design, because we have the opportunity to work together to design the wind farm. We have 3 sustainability priorities, and this is, if I had the opportunity, Rudy, to make an announcement, I will do so in the next slide, that we're very proud of. But we believe in a world that runs entirely on green energy. We, until about 3 or 4 years ago, had been an oil and gas developer who also built offshore wind farms. But now, really, at our core is this commitment to clean energy. We have divested all of our offshore oil and gas assets, as well as all of our any type of fossil generation. And for us, we see those skill sets of building offshore oil and gas really directly relating to being able to build offshore wind farms. And that's where our strong acumen comes from. Enabling sustainable growth. And really what that means is that our social and environmental impacts need to be in line with our green priorities. We can't just build a wind farm and in the course of development and construction not worry about our environment, whether that's social or technical. And then our business integrity, where we always are operating in a transparent and accountable way to our partners. And this is, the award that we were bestowed upon just a couple months ago now, ranked the most sustainable company in the world by Global Knight, which is an international ranking organization. Never has an energy company ever been bestowed this honor. And so we're really excited, and we've been sharing about it. We will be completely carbon neutral by 2025. And this will make Oersted the first major energy company to achieve that target, really far ahead of the decarbonization targets set by the IPCC and others. And then we'll have a completely carbon neutral footprint by 2040. We're working very aggressively towards that. And frankly, from a personal note, this is why I work for this company. There are quite a few offshore wind developers in the world now, but there are none who are as committed to this clean energy as we are at Oersted. And it just makes me proud. It's not like it's something we do on the side. We're not an oil and gas developer who's building wind farms. We are an offshore wind farm developer. In the US now, we're also doing solar and land-based wind, if that's something that's of interest to you. Our portfolio on that is growing every day. So, but that's kind of a topic for another time, perhaps. And I just have about 2 slides left. I hope I'm doing okay on time, Rudy. 2 slides left, just to give you a perspective if you're interested in collaborating with us, if you're a student out there and you're thinking about maybe developing a student project that Oersted could review. If you're interested, we have an internship and a scholarship program that we are not able to yet announce, but we're working on those components as well. But we break up in our organization into 6 different roadmaps when we think about research and development. The wind and waves perspective, where we are learning about how wind and waves are affecting the output of the wind farm, the capacity factors, what we're getting from a generation perspective. Our largest roadmap is our second roadmap, where we do all of our geoscience and foundation engineering in-house, which is uncommon for a developer. We have a large engineering team in-house. Our electrical infrastructure is an important roadmap. In roadmap 3 picture there, you'll see a picture of one of our very large offshore substations. It's about 7 stories tall and houses all of the electrical switchgear that we need for the wind farm. That's a permanent structure. So that's exciting, and that's an important part of our work. The 4th roadmap we do less work in, because that we leave to our turbine suppliers like Siemens, and Vestas, and GE. But the wind turbine generator itself is obviously a key component of our wind farm. Logistics, that's where you can save a lot of money and time. So logistics are important. And then our newest roadmap is environment, where we are researching, for example, how we can optimize a wind farm to have the least impact on the environment and the least risk to our schedules. Finally, here I'm just listing 6 different ways on which we have collaborated and would like to collaborate with students and academic institutions, and really any of our stakeholders. And so here you'll see 6 different opportunities, whether it's a bachelor's or a master's project. We've engaged with PhD students, actual research and development projects. We have open data sharing on a few of our wind farms where we've made the data open source. And then even from there, we can share other data from in addition to that. We do case studies and guest lectures like I'm doing today. And then we also provide input on specific research themes. So going back to the R&D slide, if the work you're doing falls within one of these 6 roadmaps, I would love to connect you with one of the roadmap managers who could, give you some input and feedback if you're interested in that project perhaps being relevant to how how Oersted in fact sees the industry. So, essentially that wraps up my formal comments. I'm putting up on the slide my email address. You should feel free to reach out to me anytime. I hope that others in your cohort have given you the feedback that I've tried to be accessible and responsive to any inquiries I've gotten from this group, and just really appreciate your opportunity and attention to this. Certainly, this is a different kind of format for a guest lecture, but I appreciate the time and opportunity, Rudy, and happy to take any questions anyone might have. Rudy, I think you're muted still.
There you go. I unmuted him.
So if unmute everybody. Just a round of applause if you can clap for Kris.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, guys. Appreciate that.
Let's see. I do have some questions from the chat box.
There were 3 questions.
Okay, anybody, any students out there with a question first? Remember, you're great now.
I have a question. This is Stanley Worthington, one of the students.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I was wondering if there's been collaboration among the developers to share in the transmission from shore out to the offshore facilities.
Yeah, great question. And one of the biggest challenges we're facing in the industry is the fact that on the East Coast, the grid was never meant to receive a large injection of power from the east to the west. All injections of power come from the west to east. And so now we are in this position where the coastal grid is not robust enough to accept these, literally gigawatt level of injection. And, so as developers, we are figuring out how we can upgrade the grid and be responsible in the injection there. And so to that end, there have been actual grid transmission developers separate from the offshore wind developers who have said, let us build the grid for you. There have been a couple right now. Anbaric is the most active. There's another one called the Atlantic Wind Connection that was originally sponsored by Google. And essentially the idea is to be an offshore wind power strip, if you will, so that you build your offshore wind farm and then you just take your plug and you plug it into the existing power strip offshore. And, that is an interesting opportunity for sure, one that's being, like a lot of work is being done on it. However, from our perspective as a wind developer, we see a lot of risk in having a major infrastructure project being built adjacent and in tandem with our major infrastructure project, them both being new to this market. And so there's a lot of what we call project on project risk associated with letting your project, your offshore wind project, be dependent upon someone else's transmission. Small anecdote on that, when we were building one of our offshore wind farms in Germany, we ended up with what we call stranded assets. We finished the wind farm and it took 18 months for the transmission developer to finish building their component. And, there's just not the same urgency if it's not your project that you're building. And so we took, a big hit when we were building that project in Germany, almost made it unfinanceable. So, that was, quite a scar for us as a company and really as an industry, as we saw this wind farm sitting there unable to transmit its power. So I think in theory, it's a great concept. In practice, we struggle with how we will be able to actually join the project from a technical perspective, and then also from a permitting and regulatory perspective, considering PJM still doesn't even know how to treat a separate grid operator entity, such as a private developer like Anbaric. So, it's a great conversation. And Rudy, you should engage with Anbaric and have them come do a presentation. They're really interesting.
That's awesome. Thank you for the response.
Sure thing.
Was there somebody who raised his hand or her hand? Any other students with a question?
I'm jealous you're outside.
Yes, I'm very lucky.
It's nice out.
It's beautiful. I'm down in Virginia.
I see Jim has raised his hand. Jim, go ahead with your question, Jim Robinson.
Yes, the question I have is to try and get our handle around, compared to the peak MWH per hour of the plant, what has been your experience in offshore wind of the average MW output per hour? In other words, its capacity factor. What do you typically see in offshore wind?
Well, that's a great question, Jim. And we, by comparison, this is why renewable energy, there's always this argument, it's an intermittent resource, right? Like you're only producing power at the moment. And so if the wind's not blowing, that reduces the output and the capacity factor of that project. Fortunately, with offshore wind, we've seen a really nice increase from the original 30 to 40% capacity factor levels to nearly 60% capacity factor with these new turbines that we're able to use, because they have such a large rotor swept area that they're able to capture they have a much lower what we call cut-in speed. So the turbine will actually engage and start generating power at only 5 meters per second of wind and continue to spin and generate power offshore with these very large blades that are so large that they could never be used on shore because they can't fit on roadways. They need to be transported from port to port and stay on the ocean side. So it's an exciting opportunity that we're getting up to 60% capacity factor with our newest wind farms. But I would say in tandem, Jim, what's paramount is developing energy storage technologies. And that is something that at Oersted, we've actually launched the world's largest battery system. It's a 20 megawatt battery in the UK that we would hope to pair with a wind farm and see how we can start advancing this conversation about storage, because it's the only way that we move to 100% clean energy.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else with a question? I know Jim Daly had a question. Jim, you want to ask that?
I can read Jim's question actually through the chat. He said at 1100 megawatt and 12 megawatt per turbine, that would require 92 turbines. What is the technique for accumulating the outputs to drive onto the shore, and what is the operating voltage?
Okay, I'll answer the second part first because that's easier. We don't know the exact voltage of the cables yet, just because we're still completing our electrical engineering and design for the project. What we anticipate is that the project will, Rudy, may I share another slide?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just going to sneak out of this presentation and pop into another one that I was preparing for tonight's webinar. I have a webinar going on tonight. Are folks able to see my screen still?
Yeah, you need to exit out of your previous screen and bring.
Okay. I think I gotta stop sharing and then start sharing.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to show a slide that I had prepared for a different presentation for tonight. Are you able to see this slide?
Yes.
Okay. So here's some more information. And I hope the person who asked the question is able to see this.
We were having problems with the flicker. I wonder if it is because you're in presentation mode. Why don't you just go back to how you had it before, just a second ago?
Okay, like this?
Like this. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see what
great.
happens.
Yeah, so this is a project overview that just shows kind of what the configuration of the electrical transmission system would be. So again, you'll notice the blue outline is the wind farm. The tan outline is the lease area. The gray area to the north of us offshore is our competitor's lease area. That's a company called Atlantic Shores. That's their lease area next to ours. And in terms of the configuration, we would plan to have at least 2 electrical service platforms offshore, if not 3. We're still in as I mentioned, the design and engineering phase of that. So One of the platforms would gather the power from the northern part of the wind farm, and that will accumulate about 800 megawatts and deliver that to Oyster Creek, which is a retired power plant, actually the country's oldest operating power plant until it retired last year in Lacey Township, New Jersey, the northern part of our project area. Now, on the southern part, we would accumulate the power into one or two platforms, depending on how we're delivering that power to the substations that are in the southern part of the project. Higbee or BL England are our two options, and we're still deciding between, which one will be more appropriate and cost effective. We're doing our studies now on that. So once that is determined, then we'll know exactly how many electrical service platforms there would be. But essentially, all the turbines would be gathered up to those platforms and then sent to shore via the export cable, where the power is then stepped up for transmission. Does that answer your question with enough specificity?
Okay.
At what voltage would these be?
We don't know the voltage yet. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
At what voltage, coming from your collection or accumulation platform, do you send the energy ashore? Is it a medium voltage level?
High voltage. A high voltage. High voltage is typical for offshore wind farm.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions for Kris? Say, Kris, I have a question. Actually, more of a comment. My class, we actually had a class on renewable energy and human rights.
Wow.
And there was one case where France had very ambitious plans for offshore wind. I think they had 6 blocks, each of them planned for generation of up to 2,000 megawatts of offshore wind. This was near the Canary Islands off the coast of southern tip of France. But they ran into a number of problems with the fishery folks there.
Mm-hmm.
And so wanted to ask you, Kris, are there some rumblings, ruminations about such pushback from the fishery folks? And because it did come up in one of your slides that you were working with them, but have you had any blowbacks?
Yes, well, as an industry, in fact, today, Rudy, a very timely question. As always, there's a project called Empire Wind that's being developed by a company called Equinor. Empire Wind, Equinor used to be Statoil, and now they're Equinor. A lot of companies are getting the oil out of their name now because it's not as popular. But just today announced another lawsuit by the fisheries community against that project, saying that the federal regulators did not do their due diligence in citing that wind farm and that it will have material harm on their livelihoods and material socioeconomic impact. And now all that needs to be considered as part of our, what we call the NEPA process, which stands for National Environmental Policy Act. And so, yeah, there certainly are. We haven't had any, we haven't had any blowback on our projects yet, but, that is partially because that project was further advanced. And so we don't know if that, a time once we're further advanced, we have the same problem. But what we've done, Rudy, is we've gone very proactive with the fishing community. We've had, I think it's over 195 individual meetings just for the Ocean Wind Project over the past 2 years, where we take the map to the fishermen. We show them what we call a chart when it's in the ocean, right? So we show them the chart and we say, here's what the turbine, orientation would be. Tell us what your feedback is. Where do you fish? How would this wind farm impact you? And we've actually gone through that collaborative design process I've talked about, where we take that feedback to our engineers and they modify the design and layout of the wind farm accordingly. So that's what makes me think and hope and pray that the fishermen, we've established the relationships, and they're really excited about, you know, the opportunity to work with us using their vessels as guard vessels or whatever it might be, and the fact that we'll actually attract more fish to the area.
Okay. Yeah, I think in this case of France, the fishermen were more concerned about the amount of onshore infrastructure that was kind of taking their space.
Interesting.
And
Yeah, maybe. See, our substations won't be coastal. We'll be running underground to a substation that's a few miles inshore, and then we'll build, you know, several acres of switch yards, but that won't be in the coastal area.
Okay.
So maybe that was a problem.
So another question from Dave Ellis, who's with PJM. I'm sorry, with
Actually,
PSEG.
Jim had a second part question before David did. Do you see Jim's question? He said, would not a better and more realistic strategy in energy capacity and energy production be cooperative with all sources as opposed to renewables instead of other sources?
Can you repeat that?
So he asked, would not a better and more realistic strategy in energy capacity and energy production be cooperative with all sources as opposed to renewables instead of other sources?
Okay, I'll try to answer that as I'm understanding it. So the way energy development generally works is that different type of developers build different types of energy sources. And so we are, you know, at Oersted committed to developing clean energy projects, but we recognize that other types of energy are important for baseload power at this time. So building, you know, other developers are building natural gas facilities, or they're building nuclear. Well, no one's really building new nuclear, but in concept one could. And so the idea is that there would be an energy supply mix, and then the grid operator, who's PJM, they are the ones who are dispatching the power based on the needs of the grid at the time. And so if at the heart of the question is, do we need a supply of different generating sources and types? I think the short answer for now is yes. And then in the future, you know, we hope to move to 100% clean energy as our environment demands. Do you think I answered that, Rudy?
Okay, I have one question from Dave Ellis, who's with PSE&G, and he states, you mentioned connection to the PJM grid. Is there clarity of how transmission would tie into the PJM operating area? Is the offshore transmission part of PJM? And I think I would ask editorially, is PSE&G a partner in this project with you?
They are, yeah. In fact, this month in April, we are hoping that we'll finalize our joint venture agreement for PSEG to, you know, have that, you know, that operational side, that development on the dry side that I mentioned earlier. So they would be a joint venture for not only the Ocean Wind project, but also our Skipjack project in Maryland. And so, yeah, we're working very closely with PSEG, who have tremendous experience in New Jersey, obviously. And so we are connecting, when we connect the wind farm to shore, we are connecting to existing nodes on the PJM grid. So we work very closely with PJM. We go through the same type of interconnection analysis and studies and application process. We are publicly listed in the PJM queue. So we go through the same exact process as any other generator because we are injecting into the PJM grid. It's just that the actual generator itself is offshore, but the actual connection is on the land-based PJM grid. I think that's what's a little harder about the question earlier about the offshore transmission system. If Barrick or another was to develop an offshore, you know, network, is that then part of PJM? If you have a whole a marine network of cables, how does that exactly work? Who has jurisdiction? What's the regulatory framework?
Good, thank you. Any other questions for Kris? If not, Kris, if you don't mind unsharing your screen, I'm going to put up my polls.
Yes.
All right, guys, as promised, we want to run a poll of, let me see, which one do I want? This is not it. Okay. I think I need to share this. Can anybody see the polls, or do I need to share the screen?
Chris is still predominant.
How about, all right.
There you go.
All right. So there are 5 questions, I believe, and most of them are single choices. And I think you can go for it right now. If you don't mind, the first question is, how much interest do you have in the topic presented today? Are you able to, okay, I can see people.
Don't just say nice things because I'm still on the line, guys.
Well, this is like Derby. So we're almost at the end. Nearly all of you have voted.
Rudy, Holly Bush said that she could not get her poll to work, but she said top ratings on all 3 questions. Thank you.
All right. So I think then we have the complete poll results. Is there anybody still answering the questions? All right. So we'll end polling, and I'll share the results. And bingo. Can everybody see the results?
Yes.
Yes. Good. So thank you again, and technology works. But we're going to go for it again next week in a panel discussion on climate change action plans. We'll have representatives from Lehigh University and Lafayette College. And hopefully we shouldn't have many problems, even though we'll have multiple speakers in this panel discussion. But Kris, I want to thank you again for providing so much new insight. You guys have made quite a bit of progress, and it's so nice to hear about this, even in a COVID world. And I think students should take note of some of the opportunities they have with Oersted.
Thank you, Rudy. Always a pleasure.
And definitely we'll call you back, hopefully very in person instead of a virtual one. And thank you again. Thank you all for attending, and thank you for your interest. And we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Kris.
Thanks, Kris.
Thank you, Kris.
Great job.
Thanks, Rudy.
Thank
We'll
you.
be in touch.
All right. See you later.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Daniel, you're still there, right?
Yeah.
Uh, your idea of Google Slides is, did you notice any flicker when she didn't go full screen?
Yes, the in her PowerPoint window there, the
Yeah.
ribbon area was flashing as well. So it's an interesting problem. No one that I was able to talk to while I was, Googling frantically behind the scenes here had ever seen this problem before. And
Well,
I wasn't able to find anything on the web either.
Well, again, we've provided you fresh data.
Right. And so everybody knows now. We're all looking to see what we can do. But folks who said they've used Google Slides have not seen this issue.
Okay.
So if, maybe try that at some point. We'll be testing it out too to see what we can find out about what causes that and why it's going on. It could also be something else that was running on her computer in the background and maybe doing something that tried to grab the screen, and hard to say.
Yeah. Well, all in all, considering all these other issues, I think it went off pretty well. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
That was great.
We had a big group from LTS. Thank you guys for bringing the SWAT team here.
Well, I think a lot of people had interest in the topic too, so.
But that helps.
Yeah. So it was great.
But good enough, if we were to do it with Google Slides, then we simply, go into Google Drive and.
Yeah, just import it. Yeah, you get the file and you say
Sorry.
open in Slides.
When you say import, you mean onto your laptop?
Into your Google Drive. So they would send you the presentation, or they could do it themselves too on a regular.
Oh, okay. They could put it on my Google Drive, and I can use Google Slides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or they could do it on their own, either one.
Yeah.
But you can import Microsoft PowerPoint into Google Slides, and then just see if that presentation works better without the blinking.
Okay. But you did notice that when it wasn't in presentation mode, it operated.
Yeah, just that top portion of PowerPoint's ribbon, they call it, that top area where the commands are and the buttons, that was flashing.
Yeah.
So very funny little glitch between Zoom and PowerPoint.
Yeah. And is it possible because we are using a co-host who's outside Lehigh? Or?
I don't think that matters. I can't imagine that. It's more something between the Zoom client program and PowerPoint's idea of what the full screen is supposed to be. That one link that I sent you had instructions for doing it with 2 screens. If you have a dual screen set up and you can set one aside, and also doing it in a windowed mode instead of as full screen, and you can tell Zoom to say, hey, make this window the whole screen. That might work better. That's just another guess that I have, because that was their sort of second option.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll figure it out, and we'll probably put a note up on the best practices in the Lehigh documentation.
Perfect.
So
again, Daniel, thank you. And I saw some other IT LTS folks. Thank you again. You
betcha. Yeah. And, I'm sure Brad and Mr. Schwartz liked it a lot.
Steve was there, Steve Saskowitz, yeah. And Susan, I don't know if you're still there.
Yep, I am.
Okay. Interesting tips on how we could, for next time around. The idea of Google Slides is worth going after.
Yeah, we just have to test it out and see what it looks like.
Yeah.
The only thing that worries me about that is that I know when we do Word doc, it's different comparison, but when we do Word documents and we import them into Google Drive, when we use elaborate formatting, there's some weirdo things that do not translate when you move it over to Google Drive.
Sure.
Put it back up out in Google or in Word documents if they look fine. So that's the only thing that would concern me, is that it would translate properly.
Yeah, you got to kind of be careful about it. Hopefully, a presentation with bullet points and things like that is a little bit simpler. But yeah, definitely, if you're any kind of import has always got some potential issues that you have to kind of pay attention to. But you can't just assume it's going to work perfectly.
And I have a question, because I know Steve was originally thinking that the security on this was a little lax the way we did it, but we did have people register through our Google Docs, and then I pulled that email list and emailed them directly. I did like a calendar invite to send the Zoom links that Rudy sent up. So he was saying either register or request the registries to have passwords. So are we okay with the way we did it? having them register and then sending the link out privately to the people who registered?
Yeah, there are lots of aspects to the Zoom technology's security. The thing that's the most sort of insecure is when people have those links and they can join the meeting with that link without having logged in anywhere, so that they're just sort of essentially anonymous users. And so if they are, a lot of them are already signed in anyway, and so when they open up the meeting, Zoom knows who they are. They have an email address associated with them, and that's usually fine. You can, within the setup of the meeting and within your preferences on Zoom, specify whether you want to allow anyone who hasn't signed in to come into the meeting. And I think for this one, we turned that off because we got so many external people. But for more class kind of oriented things that we have at Lehigh, we tend to turn that one on so that, only kids who are, enrolled in classes and have a Lehigh account and have logged into their Lehigh Zoom account are going to get into that class. It's just because of that Zoom bombing problem where people were randomly jumping into Zoom meetings by being able to guess a number and jump into a meeting by being able to predict that URL.
One interesting thing I noticed. So I was kind of watching everybody and kind of making sure people were muted, like jumped in and everything. And there was one guy, David Ellis, I think it was. I think I emailed Rudy about him. I could not mute him. Like there, the little dots on the right in his picture. Like when you clicked on it, it didn't. Everybody else's gives you the option to mute or unmute right away, but his did not even give you that option. He was the only person. And I didn't know if there was any weird way or any reason why.
I couldn't tell you. Like I said, I'm a second stringer here. I defer to people like Denise or Holly Zakos to check out with the real Zoom technology and figure out, gee, why does some people, how do they avoid being muted? I don't know.
All right.
Well, the poll results were really very promising. Maybe it's just the uniqueness of the technology that you can actually do these polls kind of efficiently.
Yeah, boom, 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 quick, done.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was awesome that you put it up and we could see real time how people were voting. I thought you only had the ability to share the results at the end. I didn't know you could see it real time. That was kind of cool.
Yeah, if it was bad, I could have hidden it. So I knew that it was going to be pretty good. But again, thanks a lot, Daniel. So the next one is the week from today. Almost the same time, but a much more complicated one, panel discussion. So Daniel, can I sign you up?
Sure, send me the invite. We'll see where we go from there.
All right. Really useful. There's so many things that come up on the fly that, we didn't even touch this. We could have interrupted her and said, hey, listen, the thing is flashing, but I didn't know what to do about it.
Yeah, it's just sort of a balance to try and say, well, what's more annoying, interrupting her or watching a little flash?
And then you spend like 10 minutes trying to figure it out when you're...
Right. I think it went just fine.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, guys. And there are two others on the line. I don't know the names, but...
they may have fallen asleep.
Yeah, who's Subdesigns? Who are you? Anybody there?
Yeah, I don't see him.
Or Mr.
And BB.
Who's BB? Hi, Mr. BB.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Hey, thanks, Daniel.
You betcha. Take care.
Hey, thanks,
All right, see ya. Thank you.
Bye-bye.